AskReddit by Owen Thepagin. Who had the biggest fall from grace in history? Henry VIII has to be up there. He was a famously handsome, pious, and noble young king, very in love with Catherine when they were married, and over time he became the wife-killing tyrant we know today. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. By the time I was a child, Bill Cosby was so universally recognized as an icon of wholesome comedy that one of the most popular kids shows of my youth was literally just a cartoon about his childhood. Now the legacy of that little cartoon show is tainted by the very subject of the show itself. That's a fall from grace. From being trusted to be a part of your kid's formative years, to becoming one of the most violent disliked men of all time. I don't know how I didn't realize that little Bill was by Cosby until right now. Guess I just never paid enough attention. That's quite a stain on my childhood now. Rudy Giuliani. After the attacks of 9/11, he brought Nick together as mayor, was on SNL, and throughout the first pitch at Yankee Stadium was really well liked by everyone. Then he was Trump's lawyer and held a press conference at the wrong Four Seasons and is seen as a bumbling idiot yes man who does whatever Trump wants. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle was an insanely popular silent movie star that had a contract in 1918 for $3 million for 3 years of films, equal to $54 million in 2021 according to Wikipedia. An unheard of amount. In 1921 he had a party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, still there, over the course of several days. Virginia Rapp ended up dying, possibly from a ruptured bladder. She, or friends, there seems to be different versions, which is a problem with this story, accused Arbuckle of raping her. The newspapers went nuts, making up stories, spreading what little they had. Arbuckle had multiple trials, but was ultimately acquitted. He was dropped by the studios. Hollywood reacted by hiring Will Hayes and forming a censor board. Many of Arbuckle's films are lost because distributors and theaters would not play them. This is probably the only person I have seen on this post that was probably an innocent man. He was accused of raping Virginia by a woman who by many accounts was a prolific blackmailer and what appears to be the predecessor of Rupert Murdoch in the media, who sensationalized it. After the third trial, which took minutes to acquit, the jury apologized to Arbuckle, saying an injustice had been done. He was never the biggest star, but Mark Salling's fall from grace was massive. Went from the star of a primetime show to charged with child porn and dead in a matter of months. On that note, Alison Mack went from the actress of the breakout character on a long-running popular superhero show to a cult leader who trafficked women for sex and forced labor, blackmailed them, branded them, and tortured them. Fred Phelps started his career as a celebrated civil rights lawyer in Kansas. Followed up Brown vs. Board of Education 20 years later and ended up forcing them to implement more fair educational conditions for students of color. Went on to form the Westboro Baptist Church, which became one of the most despicable hate groups in the US. Notorious for their homophobia and protesting at military funerals. That church was one of the most reviled hate groups in the 90s and zeros. Ian Watkins, former singer of the Welsh emo rock band Lost Prophets. Massively successful band in the scene. Turns out he dealt meth to fans to abuse them and then rape their babies' toddlers. Yes, you read right. I almost threw up when I read the indictment. Locked away for life, that one. The band has erased all music from all services as far as possible. It has tainted forever. I read the case file. Holy cow. And when asked why he did what he did, he said he did it for the lols. His password was I fuck it. And 2 of the infants' mothers sold their own babies out to him. There are text messages detailing the abuse they were planning to subject the infants to. Not the farthest, but Phil Spector is worth a dishonorary mention. This was going to my audition. The guy was a revolutionary music producer, creating the wall of sound formula. He produced music for some of the top musicians in the 60s and 70s and retired very young to his mansion in the Hollywood Hills. In 2003 he murders actress Lana Clarkson, then spends the rest of his life in prison. I forgot he died in 2021. He also is responsible for some of the most infamous courtroom photos in history. Philippe Pétain was a national hero of France after World War I. He won the 9-month Battle of Verdun as a general and inspired hope and optimism at a time when it seemed like the war would never end. Fast forward to World War II and he became the head of state of Vichy France and was a puppet for the Nazis. He ran Vichy state in a semi-fascist manner and constantly sought to appease the Nazis to preserve Vichy's limited freedoms, including signing anti-Semitic ordinances and allowing deportation to concentration camps. At the end of the war, he was convicted of treason on all counts and originally sentenced to death before being reduced to life imprisonment by Charles de Gaulle on account of Pétain's advanced age and service during World War I. De Gaulle would later summarize Pétain's life as successively banal, then glorious, then deplorable, but never mediocre, and also the Marshal is a great man who died in 1925. The trouble is, he didn't know it. China had a similar person. Wang Jingwei was beloved for his role in the 1911 revolution but is now viewed terribly for siding with the Japanese in WWII. His fate was different though. He died in 1944 from a wound he got from an assassination attempt in 1939. His tomb was destroyed by the ROC army and his burial place now has a note that calls him a traitor. I'm sure there are worse people, but Harvey Weinstein went from being one of the most powerful people in the world to be completely reviled and losing everything. This is the guy who had Meryl Streep and Oprah on speed dial and married to a woman 1000x too attractive for him. He now uses a walker, has lost his fortune and his reputation, and his dick is literally rotting off. In case you didn't know, several of the women who accused him of sexual misconduct all pointed out that he wasn't really interested in sex per se, he just wanted massages. According to some, his hygiene was so poor he developed an infection in his dick, which then rotted the flesh after being left untreated. He basically got gangrene on his genitals and was effectively impotent. He's been described as having fish-like genitals. Ick. Jimmy Savile. Mega famous UK radio DJ and TV presenter. Did a ton of charity work. Was a Knight of the Realm. Post-death, he was revealed to be a massive pedophile, protected and ignored by those around him for decades. Edit, Savile not Savile. Massive pedophile doesn't do it justice. He was one of the most vicious and prolific pedophiles ever in the UK's history apparently. Aaron Burr. He was Vice President of the United States when he shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. The duel killed Burr's political career. He was dropped from Thomas Jefferson's ticket in the 1804 election, and he couldn't even win an election for governor of New York. In 1805, Burr plotted to invade Spanish territories and create his own empire with a side plot to incite a revolution against the United States. In 1807, Burr was put on trial for treason, and he narrowly escaped a conviction. Don't forget he wanted to cause New England to secede from the Union out of spite. Benedict Arnold. Hero general of the American Revolution. One of George Washington's best assets. Felt slighted and overlooked by his contemporaries. Switched sides to the British, made no difference to the war effort. Died in disgrace in England. His name is now a synonym for traitor. Edit, since this is getting some attention, for anyone interested in learning more about the man, I highly recommend watching Benedict Arnold, A Question of Honor, a TV movie from 2003. Starring Aidan Quinn as Arnold and Kelsey Grammer as Washington. Arnold had 2 horses shot under him, including one at the Battle of Saratoga, where he was instrumental in securing victory at Bemis Heights. Arnold was going between the lines while being shot at, unharmed for most of the battle as he urged his men on until both he and his horse was hit with the final volley as the British were fleeing and the Americans were taking the important position. Arnold's leg was shot and broken by the horse. Following this, the British at Saratoga surrendered. This was a major inflection point of the American Revolution, showing Europeans that the Americans were serious and could beat the British on land, and soon foreign aid was given openly. Had Arnold been killed that day, all over the Northeast you would see statues to this man. Instead there is but one monument to his injured leg. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/boot_monument in Saratoga that doesn't even say his name. Chris Benoit. He was famous as a pro wrestler until he murdered his wife and child. I remember when this came out I was in disbelief about what happened. Jared Fogle. He started and ended his career trying to get into smaller pants. OJ has to be up there. What would the Terminator franchise be like if James Cameron didn't think he was too nice to play a killer? Philip Paytain would be one. Good one. Excellent example. French hero of WWI to Nazi collaborator of WWII. Robespierre. His actual death was brutal. For those who don't know, he tried to kill himself, but was stopped and ended up only blowing his own jaw off. He then was kept alive all night with a massive facial injury until he was beheaded in the morning. Just before he was beheaded, the executioner ripped the bandages off his face, and only the guillotine blade silenced his screams. One of the major events that stands out during the French Revolution for me. Not the biggest, but Armie Hammer casually outing himself as a cannibal was pretty big. Edit, there is a docuseries about it called House of Hammer. He outed himself. I thought women came forward and he denied it. Jim Jones. He originally stood up for civil rights, then he became a cult leader. From a civil rights leader to cult murderer who was responsible for more than 900 deaths. He was always a cult leader. He was just helpful in utilizing his cult in being able to influence politics, which made him useful to politicians and kept the cult from attracting negative attention. Harvey Weinstein. He was Hollywood when he got outed for the pose he is, but this guy produced, just naming the top 3, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, 2, every Tarantino movie except Hollywood, and 3, Good Will Hunting, and, subsequently, about every Damon or Affleck project from that time to his downfall. He's won more Oscars than any person could ever dream and has made more money off films than maybe anyone ever. That guy, oh man. I think he fell the furthest, the hardest and the fastest. Well deserved though. Well fucking deserved. One of his victims said he had Fernie's gangrene around his bits. Never thought the dick would match the face. Whatever you do not Google Fernie's gangrene. Bill Cosby. Hard agree, especially when you consider how inspirational he was to most of the general populace. Many of our household name comedians looked up to him and became comedians because of him, and he was involved in many of the largest civil rights movements across the nation. The fact he was doing what he did to those women for all of those decades is much bigger than any other person I can think of. John Edwards. Ran for VP, getting ready to run for Pres. Find out he had an affair and a kid while his wife was dying of cancer. This is the one that sprang to mind. Didn't his wife eventually die while he's become a footnote in history? Roses are red, violets are glorious, don't try to surprise, Oscar Pistorius. Never set a foot in prison though. I'd say King Edward VIII had a pretty big fall. I knew watching The Crown would pay off someday. Imagine how WW2 would have turned out if Edward VIII working at the time. Benedict Arnold would be celebrated as the second most important founding father after George Washington, if not for, well, you know. Deleted. Not the biggest fall, but Charles Lindbergh deserves to be in the conversation. After making the historic first solo transatlantic flight, and gaining the sympathy of many after the kidnapping and murder of his son, he promoted American neutrality in WWII. Though he reversed his stance after the attack on Pearl Harbor, many had already branded him a Nazi sympathizer. He eventually did rehabilitate his image, but after his death, it came out that he had 3 separate secret families throughout Europe. So I guess it's a mixed legacy at best. Lance Armstrong. Not just the drug thing either. He went to insane lengths to silence people trying to expose the drug scandal within the cycling sphere. He threatened people and publicly harassed and embarrassed people. Even former Tour de France winners weren't safe from his wrath. He was invincible and used it to bludgeon people's careers, reputations and personal lives. Kevin Spacey was once my favorite actor, but now I can't look at him the same in any of his works. Edit. If I get one more Edit Silver, I'm going to puke in my mouth. Facing 7 new charges in England. John Wilkes Booth. From famous actor to political assassin,